Glorious people, I'm making you an update today on how Glory 2nd Edition is going. I'm going to use a sports analogy to talk about it. I'm going to talk about the concept of overtime. Overtime in a sport is when the regular hours are over and there's still game left to be done. Sometimes there's such a thing as double overtime. Glory is probably in something like double overtime, especially for people who bought a first edition, where I had started the manufacturing process, but the key component of the manufacturing process failed. The money and they going straight to the press, kind of for good reason, and we went on to a Kickstarter, and now we've gone on to whatever this is, overtime. So overtime sucks. You want to win in regular time, but overtime can also be glorious. This is part of the analogy as well. Some of the best plays, the highlight reel from a hockey game or some other sports game, can happen in overtime. I am telling you today that such a good play is happening in this overtime. During this OT, I have done more design work than I would have imagined. Normally you're just trying to get the files ready to go to the manufacturer. But in this case, I overpromised on single player campaign mode, which required some heavy lifting design-wise. And to balance that out, I had to make some changes that required me to go back to multiplayer and make sure that nothing really broke, right? Normal design work. But recently, I cracked open some of my original playtesting down in the basement and tried to remember the original spark of inspiration, the muse that whispered to me the idea of first edition. Because as you go on, you do Kickstarters and that, you start learning what people want, what the general consensus is, and you can lose that spark and just try to sort of please the common denominator. So I wanted to resist that urge, have a little courage, look back, and see if there are any refinements in this overtime. If I could justify this overtime, utilize this extra time that I didn't want to, roll the dice and probably not make any changes unless I get a natural 20. And I submit to you that a natural 20 was rolled relatively recently. So I made a few changes to the game that draw upon some of the inspiration of the original concept, right? I had many original versions before it went on to its initial Kickstarter, right? So many of you have not played Glory First Edition, but I'll tell you in Second Edition here, we are going to make some changes that will thematically make sense, but were hard to design in. Towns heal your health. Havens, when you start your turn on a haven, you get a chance to move anywhere within 5 spaces, so they're really logistical. It's still, it'll heal 1 health instead of 2, and you can still peek at the nearby layer. So it's super logistical. It also means with marching, you roll your movement on an 8-sided dice, and wherever you are, there's 2 die numbers that will allow you to go to a haven. So 2 out of 8 is 1/4. So 1/4 of the time, no matter what, you will be able to get to a place where you have full agency over your movement in the following turn. And usually there's more than one path available to you without symmetry. So usually there'll actually be 2 havens, each with their own 2 distinct die numbers with which you can reach them. So that's 4 out of 8. It's 50% of the time in most situations you'll have a chance to get to one of these logistics centers. So how often is it symmetrical versus unsymmetrical? I'd say it's like 70-80% of the time it's asymmetrical. So 70 or 80% of the time it's 50-50, whether you can get to a spot where you can have full agency over your movement. And the rest of the time, 25% chance. So that means it's somewhere between 25 and 50% of the time you can go to one of these locations. It's maybe about 40%, roughly speaking, 40, somewhere between 40 and 45, I would guess. And the rest of the time, you'll have like a choice between 4 spots usually, with as long as you have at least 2 points of health so that you can march. To do this, I had to change some quests up a little bit so that 12 out of the 15 of possible quests you have 4 in any given game really require you to go to multiple locations on the map. And the reason I needed to do this is to make sure that the havens were useful to everybody, so that you'll always have a quest where the havens help you out, are important enough. I had to change a battle so that some battles are easy but just give you coin, because with towns healing you up fully, battles are more competitive with glory from quests. Yeah, a few like subtle changes like this. But the bottom line is it plays like a charm. It's quite smooth. It's a great trajectory from first edition to second edition, using the experience of first edition, going through the playtesting for second edition, and then circling back to some original content I keep in my basement and sort of attempting to integrate it without much expectation, and it just being kind of lucky and coming together in a special kind of way. So that's my story to you about overtime, which is kind of nice. It doesn't justify the overtime. It more than justifies the overtime, but it doesn't in the sense that like this overtime did not happen because I was trying to find this improvement. It's just because I'm in this overtime anyway, I'm always looking at the game and, took a moment to really intelligently reflect with discipline on some of my original ideas and see if I can sort of rekindle the artistic integrity that you start out with and you kind of erodes over time as you're making a product, as you're trying to sell, as you're trying to be a business, as you're infected by the common denominator of like all Kickstarters and everybody telling you what they want. You got to have kind of a mix of like adding something new and giving people what they want, So that went well. Other news and updates. This is more about Hogue Publishing. But another piece of news is that I've decided that Shopify as a website domain sucks. I used to use Wix. I'm going to go back to Wix. Shopify, you need to buy an app to do anything on it. It is super unflexible. It's super stiff. I joke with somebody the other day that you need to buy an app to turn your images clockwise, and you need to buy a separate app to turn your images counterclockwise. If any of you is ever thinking about publishing your own game and selling online, I don't really recommend Shopify, even though they're the go-to. I'm going back to Wix. There's lots of freedom. I can show off all the components. I can write the rules up in a nice way that you can get at them online. It's fantastic. Embed some video. I used to do it that way. It was awesome. And it actually drove a lot of sales. Most of my sales were off my website, not even my Kickstarter in first edition. So let's go back to that. That's just a interesting update for Hogue Publishing. And the last thing I wanted to get at here, I was going over my first edition ratings on BoardGameGeek.com, and there's a really obvious bell curve around high 7 point something, low 8 point something, where you've got like lots of 10s and 9s, but more 8s and 7s, and a few 6s and 5s. So it makes, normal distribution. So that helps me trust that it's good feedback. And if any of you are on Board Game Geek a lot, you know that even a 7 is a pretty good mark. It can be a pretty brutal jungle. Whereas if you go on to like Amazon or sometimes ratings are always almost perfect. That's not true even for top 10, 20, 100 games on BoardGameGeek.com. There's lots of the best game out there that you think nobody could ever hate. People are giving 3s and 4s to. So that's cool. And I kind of wanted to make this comment about taste, mood, and attitude, and trying to prepare you, which I'll do more of in the coming months as the board game gets to you, how to enjoy Glory. Because we sit down and the luck of the dice of the cards in any game will give you a different experience with the same game between day 1 and day 2. You might be in a different mood as well, and then you have different players with different personalities. So there'll be some game that's perfect for you and somebody else just isn't to their taste. And I'm trying to, there have been people who have emailed me or comments on Instagram or direct messaged me through Instagram or on Kickstarter and said, like, you know, they pack Glory with them when they go on trips to introduce people. It's one of their few Take Anywhere games, first edition. I think partly because you can just get going so fast, but obviously the game has to be good as well. And I think that Glory really tried not to have a gimmick. You could call the dry erase kind of a gimmick, but it wasn't. It was just trying to keep it simple. And I do think it'll be to a lot of people's tastes, but I'll be thinking about I'll be asking you as you get the game to try on the most fitting attitude to have the best chance of getting something out of Glory. Glory bucks a lot of trends. It's like super generic fantasy, right? I think that there's themes and symbols in there that are a little bit deeper than normal, that are subtle. I don't really want you to be able to read the rules and know why it's so great. I want you to be experienced and surprised, like, wow, that comes together. That was a really epic ending. Or why was that so tight? There's so much, seems to be so much luck involved in the game. Why does this game seem to be neck and neck sometimes? You know, sort of, I want there to be some je ne sais pas, which is French for I know not what. I want there to be some magic sauce rather than gimmicky. So, you know, I guess I want to sort of silently prepare you for looking for, bucking the trend on some things like roll and move. Everybody knows that roll and move is a bad idea. It's terrible. It's the most worst game mechanic of all time. And I think it can be used correctly. And especially in Glory 2nd Edition, I think it's really going to shine. I think there's a good chance that the muse that spoke to me may speak to you as well, especially with these last editions. So I want you to stay hyped. I know you've got other things going on in your life. You've got other board games coming through Kickstarter. You've got your favorites, everything else. So this is just a few minutes of your time, if you've reached this far into the video, to say Glory's coming along nicely, maybe even more than nicely in overtime here, just by luck. And stay hyped. Stay hyped, glorious people. I'll get this game to you eventually. I haven't heard back from my manufacturer on my last set of communications. I have another update that will come up soon that has more to do with how the manufacturing is going. But for now, this is my update to you about some of the other non-manufacturing updates with regard to Glory. Thanks for listening.